The research focuses on the role of shame, which has come up a lot in the conference today, and really trying to understand better what's going on in terms of how body-focused behaviours and anxiety and depression, which are really common, how they're related to each other, but also importantly, whether shame actually helps us understand that relationship. So the involvement of shame in understanding those two things.
Do we know how common BFRBs are? And what's your sense of the accuracy of the statistics?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So, I mean, the statistic that's been talked a lot today is around 5% of people experiencing BFRBs. Maybe in terms of the number of people who have sort of significant distress and impairment might be lower than that. But I think there's a real question about what we know and what the data is based on. So, for example, in the UK, when we're looking at children and adolescent mental health, we're really reliant on data sets like the NHS digital data set, which is amazing. Because it's huge and it's UK based, and actually at the moment we don't have that kind of data. So questions about BFRBs aren't asked in that survey. So we really don't know about the prevalence of that in the UK amongst particular age groups. And we also don't know whether that's changed over time. So we know, for example, lots of other emotional disorders, anxiety or depression have increased over the last sort of 10, 15 or so years. And that may also be the case for BFRBs, but without the data, it's really hard to know.
And Talia's work was a community-based sample.
That's right.
And they had very high clinical levels, not just of BFRBs, but also of anxiety and depression.
That's right, they did. And actually, you know, we thought long and hard about how to recruit this sample, because ideally you want clinical samples, but actually we're not sure that those are in clinics. So I think many young people are not presenting. So actually doing community-based research in many ways is actually a better starting point, especially when you've got difficulties that people don't talk about, and that, you know, when they do talk about them aren't taken seriously or people misunderstand them, that actually just going straight out to the community is a much better way. And so being able to recruit through, you know, other sort of support groups, online forums, social media means that you're not having to face that issue. And actually, when we looked at our sample, they looked like a clinical sample in terms of the levels of anxiety and depression and in terms of the severity of the BFRBs. So from that point of view, it felt like it was a broadly representative sample.
So shame is a kind of mediator. That was what I got from your presentation between BFRBs and either depression or anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us a bit about the relationship between these three things.
Yeah, that's right. So essentially, you know, you've got this relationship between BFRBs and anxiety and depression. And then the big question is there another variable, a third variable that could account for that relationship? And so we looked at that. The study design meant we can't tell about causality, so we don't know exactly the direction of effects. But essentially what we found was that when we looked at BFRBs and depression, that actually there was a relationship between those two things, but also actually there was a relationship with shame. Shame partially mediated that relationship. So we can explain some of what's going on with depression and body-focused relationships by understanding that shame is a factor. And in fact, in the survey, we looked at shame in terms of like how you feel about yourself as a person, how you feel about your body, how you feel about your behaviours. They were all very similar levels. So we kind of pulled them all together and then looked at it in that way. Anxiety is actually slightly different to that. So with anxiety, again, there's a relationship between BFRBs and anxiety. But actually, when we looked at shame and we put shame into the model, it wiped out that direct relationship between sort of hair pulling and anxiety. Essentially, shame seemed to explain all the variants in that relationship. So that's really interesting, because shame is about how you feel about yourself and what's happening, and often anxiety is about sort of future threat. So actually, if you're hair pulling and then you're worried about being exposed and other people being aware of that and negatively evaluating you, it's understandable that makes you really anxious. And so actually, to understand that important component in the relationship is really important, because then you can sort of think about, right, what do we need to do about that?
Is there something specific with BFRBs, do you think, that we need to take into consideration in helping people identify whether it's a problem or not, given that secrecy and shame is such a big part of this set of conditions?
Yeah. If we're thinking of it on a continuum, but essentially there's a point where we say, right, anyone above this line or this threshold is within a clinical range. Often that is about the level of distress and impairment it has on an individual. And actually we talked today a bit about some of, that positive self-soothing experience people might have in some instances, when things are within kind of normal ranges. But actually we're talking about sort of it getting beyond that. So I think clinically, we've been really looking for people where actually it is having a negative impact on their lives. It's at a level of severity that it's interfering and they can't do what they want in their life, but it makes them feel awful about themselves. And sometimes that is about having an opportunity to speak to a medical practitioner and to be able to really thoughtfully think about what's going on for that person, their experience, and whether actually it's in that range. Because if it is, actually, then we'll help that person. Often people are, they know whether they need help or not. So actually, just simply asking people, is this at a level where you think it's out of control and you need help, is really important. But if someone's presenting for help, then we need to take that really seriously, because they may underplay it because of that huge cloak of shame, that actually, if somebody is feeling shameful, it's understandable that they present it in a way where they might underpresent it because they're not quite sure about how it's going to be received. And therefore, if someone is help seeking and they're starting to tell you about it, it's about how you then open up that discussion. And I think some medical professionals, many of whom may not really know about this, it's about being open to it. And if you don't know much about it, being able to say, this isn't something I know about, but I'd like to know more, and, tell me about your experience, and I'm going to go away and do some research, and, and then maybe we can come back and think about what we need to do to help you.
Embrace the uncertainty. That's something that healthcare professionals aren't that great at doing often.
No, I know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because that in itself is anxiety provoking if you believe that you are the expert and you have to be an expert on everything. But of course, we can't possibly be. And, if you think about GPs in a kind of primary care role, you cannot be an expert on everything that walks into your consulting room. So actually being able to sit comfortably with the idea that there will be areas that you know nothing about, and embracing that and seeing it as an opportunity for learning is really important.